No, 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 no. Kasha. Did you get it off? Okay, good. Hello, good morning. Oh.
Hello. All right, let me go get
Hey, children.
Hello.
Okay,
All right. You ready?
Birthday card. Why do you want to
Yeah. I'll get her. Just a minute.
I don't like it. Go put it up. Then come sit down. Hi. Y'all come sit down. Say hi. Okay, okay. I'm gonna be right here, Posh. Oh, baby. It's lesson tonight. Lesson. Slide over all the way over.
No.
You wanna what? It's class time, baby. Sunny, 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 sunny. Sit down. Amen, amen, amen. Please. You want some more cereal? Some popcorn? You want no popcorn? Yes, you do. Look at your face. You want some popcorn. You don't want it? Don't. You want more cereal? Here, sit back. Right, now. 25. High five. Up high. Up high. The black hand side.
You know where you put my glasses?
Yes.
My glasses in your window, right?
Okay. Is that fine with you?
Don't go in my room. You know where you put my glasses?
Because I didn't put them anywhere.
They were on my piano, right? I didn't mess with them yet. I'm doing it.
Morning, Mama Dominique.
Good morning.
Good morning. Say good morning.
Good morning.
There you go. There you go.
What's her name? I don't want to do. I don't want to do. Yeah. No, I do.
I should stop that.
Should I wait about 5 minutes?
Okay, no problem.
Okay. I want you to pay attention. Because the last time we did
Go sit down. I'll put you.
distracted. All of you. Everybody distracted. You know, I hear we're distracted, especially.
Wow. We have a gaming chair.
So will you sit?
Yeah.
Sit all the way back. Okay, Posh. Yeah, open up, okay?
I don't want to.
Sit down right here.
You don't want
Yeah, no.
to. You're food. This is where Mama could use. You know what you said. it's dark.
Are we recording this?
Yes.
Okay. Oh.
Right here. Stop.
Right here.
The chair.
The right way. If you don't want to use a chair, you can sit on the floor. Leo. You can have
Chair.
here, sit in that chair.
Yeah, baby. All right. Yeah, just like that.
Okay. Adrian, I think I need to sit.
Right here. To control how the chair moves. So you can stop it like that. You can stop it like that. Okay? So we can-
Yes. Pine tree. So if you're taking notes, you can write the word pine tree in the center of your worksheet. Write it already. Put your notebook in your lap. Right. Listen to what I'm saying, and I want you to write as much as you can. Okay. Take out here. So today we're gonna really focus on the longleaf pine tree. But the medicinal and spiritual properties can apply to just the pine trees in general. So I have here the loblolly pine. It has 3 needles, 3 clusters inside of each little, I don't know if you call these little brackets. So the next time you're looking at a pine tree, count the needles inside of each little pocket area. There's 3 needles in each bracket. So if you separate them, there'll be 3 of them. Some of them have 2. It really depends on the type of pine tree it is. So for the loblolly pine, here's the pine cone. It's a little ragged because this is Kahir's and he like broke little pieces off of it. But if you look at the pine cone parts, you'll see like a little needle at the end of it. It's almost like a horn.
Get something.
Okay. So it's a little sharp, very spiky on the edges. Okay. So, for a longleaf pine tree, they exist all over Southeast America, from East Texas to Louisiana, all the way up into even Southern Maryland. I think most people think of Maryland as a northern state, but under some spaces, parts of it is considered the South. It's part of Southeast America. So the pine tree, the longleaf pine tree, existed all over this area. I don't know if have you guys seen Pocahontas? The movie Pocahontas. One part of the movie, she was in the forest, and I believe those trees were longleaf pine trees. Hold on. Adrian, you don't have to write down everything that I say, but write down as much as you can retain, and we'll go over it, okay? You don't have to get frustrated. You're just taking notes.
Daddy.
Okay?
What do these do?
So, if you remember in the movie Pocahontas, she was in the forest, and there were these tall trees. They're very tall. The longleaf pine tree can reach up to like I think back in the old days, back in the day, it reached up to be 154 feet tall, very tall. So with that type of height, a lot of the leaves, they kind of settle high as well. And there's a clarity through the forest. It's very clear. You can see straight through the forest. It's not very jungle-like. Everything is very clear. Leo, can you stop being disruptive? Thank you. So the tree is very tall. The needles, the reason why it's called longleaf pine tree is because the needles are very long. They're the longest needles you can find on the pine tree, and they reach from 8 to 18 inches long. Okay, and remember they're in clusters of 3. So when you divide each part, there's 3 needles in each cluster. It's susceptible to storm and wind damage. It loves the sun. It needs full sun, and remember, I was talking about the clarity that you can see through the forest. It's a clear view. A lot of times, the land that it's on, the waters tend to be, not the waters, but the soil is kind of muddy, like muddy waters. And you notice here in the southeast, we get a lot of hurricanes. So it's really interesting that the longleaf pine tree kind of just settled here on a mass scale. So for the first 5 years of the longleaf pine tree's life, it is short and grass-like. You have like these little needles coming out of the ground. And it takes about 120 years for that plant to mature. And once it reaches maturity, it can live up to 500 years. So it takes a long time to mature, and it lives for a very long time. Okay. So in the very beginning, of time, there was 4 to 5 million acres of pine trees. So that spanned all over across the Southeast America. Okay. So now I want to read a story, a one-ida story. Some people say it's a legend, and some people say that it's actually true. Like this is a true story. But it's called the tree. The story is called the Tree of Peace. Okay. I say it's true, and it actually happened in the early 1800s. So in the Haudenosaunee, which is the Iroquois language, there was a terrible conflict between the nations, between the people. Okay. So this conflict was rooted in cycles of pain, revenge, and chaos. A messenger of peace sent from the Great Spirit, the peacemaker, sought to unite the 5 warring tribes. After convincing them to unite, they came together to make peace. But they still carried their weapons. The peacemaker uprooted a white pine tree and had them throw all of their weapons into the hole. He then replanted the tree, and the underground waters carried away the weapons. On the tree, the needles grew in clusters of 5. So this is the white pine tree. The longleaf pine tree has three in each cluster. So the white pine has 5. So on the tree, the needles grew in clusters of 5 to represent the 5 nations who came to find peace. The roots of the tree spread out in 4 directions, to the north, south, east, and west. The roots are called the roots of peace. An eagle perched on top of the tree to watch over the roots of peace. Under the tree, the branches spread wide for all to gather. It is from this Native American story that we can understand why the white pine is called the Tree of Peace, and why the white pine carries such power here on our landscape. The pine tree is a very pivotal point in our history. Very powerful. So I talked about, so studying the pine tree is like a rabbit hole. It's a lot. It's a whole lot. You can go deeper and deeper in your study of this plant. Okay. So there was a man, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this man later on as we go through the class. But his name was John Lawson, and he documented a lot of the plants and the many cultures that he saw here in North America. He documented a lot of information on these plants. And from his research, the native names of the pine tree are Hyta, Unosa, and Huhe. I don't know if I'm pronouncing those names right. At this point, he is the only person who I've been able to gather research on these indigenous names. But I plan to study a little bit further to confirm those names. Okay. So the indigenous people here in America, they utilize the pine tree for just about everything. It was their medicine for illnesses. They used pine sap to cover their wounds. It created a barrier between the air or all of the outside elements and the womb. So it's used for a lot of skin problems. I know a lot of people make soap with pine tar, like the sap that comes from the tree, and they use it for their eczema and psoriasis and all that stuff to heal your skin, or to heal their skin. But the lumber, the wood was used to create homes. The bark is very thick. They use pine needles, specifically the longleaf pine tree. They use those needles to make baskets. So basket weaving is something I just learned about. Okay. Say that again. Hmm? You can get one later. Hold on a minute, okay. So they use the pine tree sensibly for many different things. They also had, in order to maintain these vast pine forests, they used fire as a farming technique. Okay. So what would happen, and what they would do is they would set the forest on fire. What's the word? I don't know. It's not inflammable. I don't know the word, but there's something about the longleaf pine tree. There's like essential oils in the needles that prevent it from catching on a full-blown fire. So what would happen is they would set the fire to the land, and the fire will get rid of everything else, you know, be very burnt, and then after that, new life would come up. Okay. The pine trees are strengthened, more beneficial herbs, other plants would come up that the people and the animals need, you know, to live a wholesome life. All of these new things would come up. And a lot of times when we think about people, indigenous people around the world using fire as a farming technique, or to maintain and heal the land, we think of Aboriginal Australians. But we do that here as well, or that used to be done here. And now that's kind of been lost. And we'll get further into that a little bit more. So now back to John Lawson. This is the man who, he was an Englishman, and he came to North Carolina to survey the land. Some people will call him a naturalist, or he's a colonizer, but they would call him a naturalist. He documented all these plants. he documented the traits of all of the different tribes, their different physical differences, cultural differences, burial rites, all of that. He documented everything, all their customs, everything. Okay. He was in North Carolina a whole lot along the Pamlico and Neuse rivers. Okay. So I'm gonna read something by a woman named Marjorie Hudson. Again, this whole thing is a huge rabbit hole, so I have to go further into it. But there's this journal, a recollection of his death. And while John Lawson was going through the lands, first of all, he was appointed by the Lord Proprietors in Great Britain. So they basically hired him to survey the land to prepare for an invasion, a takeover, so they can acquire land. During his time here, during his travels here, he did acquire land by different grants, different government grants. So that was given to him. We know that wasn't his land though. But so this is the death of John Lawson by Marjorie Hudson. And this is relevant to the pine needles. So they've taken his clothes, picked the razor straight out of his pocket. One brave fingertip touches the blade. Bright blood springs from his thumb and he laughs. The pitch pine split by the women is ready. A clay pot full of splinters, and now, one by one, the women thread these needles into his flesh, pushing just hard enough to bring the blood, to press past the strange white skin to the devil underneath. The man stands quiet at first, then he begins to scream. So in 1711, the Tuscarora Indians of North Carolina murdered John Lawson, sticking him all over with pitch pine splinters before setting him ablaze. At the time, Lawson may have been the best English friend the Tuscarora had. From his first encounters, he seems clearly to have respected them. And in his writings, he lauded their natural graces, admired their courage, and blamed his fellow Englishmen for their destruction. So, even though it may seem like John Lawson came in as a generous man, his coming to this land incited other Englishmen or other colonizers to come in this land and create even a larger invasion. So in the second paragraph of this passage that I just read, it preps your mind or trains your brain to kind of sympathize with John Lawson being murdered by the indigenous people here, the Tuscaroras. But we have to look at that on a deeper level, because on so many accounts, when one colonizer would come in, more would come in, and the native people were not ready for this. They weren't expecting that. So more would come in, and then even more would come in, and they would just keep coming and keep coming. So they went to John Lawson, who was the source. And clearly, we know for a fact that he was hired to do this work, to prep the minds of the English people in Europe, to put this image of an Eden in their brains. Okay. Hey. Tiger, you stop moving. So, So later on down the road, after, at the death of John Lawson actually was, a war came out of that. The Tuscarora Indians or Native Americans, they were a warrior people. And it was very brutal, their confrontation. And it's brutal and beautiful at the same time. And of course, obviously, things didn't work out and, there was a fail. But they did not back down easily. They fought back very hard. There are statements from John Lawson saying that he was actually where he respected the Tuscaroras and he was wary of them, very mindful, knowing that they are a warrior people. Okay. So after that, after this major war that happened, this is when the naval industries started really increasing in North Carolina, and I'm pretty sure in other parts of the South as well. So with these naval industries, the longleaf pine tree was very, very important. Okay. The pine tree provided tar. When you burn the wood, it would create a tar, and that tar was used for caulking, making things waterproof. So they would use that material, that resin from the pine tree, they would use that to seal holes in their ships. They would, apply it to their ropes to make them waterproof, apply it to the underbelly of the boat to make it waterproof. So it was a really big industry, one of the biggest industries at that time. So Black Americans were predominant turpentiners. There were other people there as well, natives, poor white people, they were present as well. Many of the Black turpentiners, or turpentiners, they were enslaved. Some of them were free people of color, just looking for work. Okay. There's a book, I can't remember who the author is, but it's called Zora and Me. And it is based on Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Are Watching God. And in the town of Their Eyes Are Watching God was Eatonville. So in the story of Zora and Me, that setting was in Eatonville. And further into the story, there was a man there. He was a musician, real homely, nice jazzy man. And he was a turpentiner. He would go, this was in Florida. So he was a turpentiner. Eatonville's in Florida in the story. Yeah. But he was a turpentiner, and he would go wherever he could go to harvest the tar for turpentine. So what would happen is the turpentiners, they will cut like a V-shaped slits into the tree, into the pine trees, and they would put a bucket underneath it and let all of the tar ooze out and fall into the bucket. And then at that point, they would take it to a distillery and they would boil it with the water. And once you boil it with the water, that's the substance that comes after that is the turpentine. Okay. So once you cut into that pine tree in that manner, it's after about 3 years, it's going to be dead. It's death sentence. So there was a whole industry surrounding this that everyone partook in. And remember, we have millions and millions and millions of acres of these trees. And everyone is swarming in, trying to make a buck, trying to make money. And it was very abusive. Okay. So this way of working with the pine tree, it was very different from the old ways of working with the pine tree. With the old ways, everything was controlled. And of course, you did it, there was no over harvesting or being greedy. So then we come to this time, to the 1900s, where it's abusive. And for a lot of people of color, they were there, you know, forced by force. They were there just to make money. I have an ancestor that he was a turpentiner. He was in Beaufort County of North Carolina, and he would work with the pine trees on his land. So this was kind of a family thing, and I guess he would take it over to distilleries and sell them so they can make the turpentine solvent. Okay, let me state that over again just to be clear. First, it starts out as tar. Okay, you burn the wood, then the tar oozes out. Okay, when you boil the tar, it becomes a liquid like pitch. Okay, when you distill the gum, you distill it with a water, it becomes turpentine. So after they would harvest that tar, they would hold on a minute, I'm talking here. Come here, Leo, can you stop doing that, please? Here. So after they would collect that tar, they would sell it to someone so they can distill it and create it into turpentine. Is that clear? You can give me a head nod if you understand the process of how they make the turpentine. Okay, good. So this is what the people did. Okay, I still have 10 minutes. So the naval industry was huge, very big deal. Some people even said it was like the equivalent to the industries that they had in the Mediterranean. You know, the sea peoples working on the boat and all that stuff. It was the equivalent or even more. So a lot of foreign people in other parts of the world, when they thought of North Carolina, they thought of tar. It was a natural resource. Okay. So hold on a minute, Adrian. Okay. So coming to today, remember there were 4 to 5 million acres of pine trees. And so with the abuse of the pine tree, it has been reduced to 60,000 acres. Okay. So not only have they been reduced by the numbers, they have, with the plants in general, they have taken out all of the government or the state officials. They don't like who manage the parks. They don't like female plants. Female plants produce seeds, and you know, once a seed hits the ground, more plants will come up. So it's a lot to manage. So they've taken out the female plants and replaced them with the male plants. You know, the male plants have a whole lot of pollen and stuff like that. So that affects the reduction, or that affects the growth of the longleaf pine tree. That has contributed to them staying reduced. That taking out the female plants that produce more seeds, and the use of fire. We don't use fire anymore to manage the forest. So right now, the forest should be, if we were managing it correctly, the forest should be very clear. There should be a clarity through them. And at this point, they're jungle-like. All of the pine trees have been replaced with the broadleaf trees. You know, the ones that give you kind of that tropical feel, that thick bush. Okay. So we've not practiced the old ways of, you know, creating the sacred fire to burn the plants and allow new life to come in. With those fires, there are many animals that depend on them. When you create that sacred fire, more turkey vultures, or I don't know, maybe not turkey vultures, but wild turkeys come. Without it, they don't come. They've been reduced. With the reduction of the pine leaf, the longleaf pine, the red cockaded woodpecker is now endangered. There are many reptiles and animals that depend on this tree, this plant. So when you think about everything that we've covered, a lot of the traits, you can understand the traits of the pine tree much better. It's an evergreen. It stays green all year. Now, it lives up to be 500 years old. It takes a very long time to mature. So there's this air of longevity. Okay. You think about how the people use the tar to create a barrier against their skin. They use the tar to create barriers on, the ships, so to make them waterproof. So it keeps unwanted things away. It keeps evil away. It's very protective. Okay. So this week I'm gonna write up everything that we're discussing right now so that you can read it if you prefer to read. And I think I have covered everything that I wanted to talk about, you guys. So let me know if you have any questions. You can turn your mic on if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any?
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Say that again.
Is there seeds inside pine cones so to grow?
Yes. Yes, and the female plants.
How do you know?
So,
I'm sorry.
So in my experience, dealing with the pine tree, like if you go outside, maybe not right now because the pollen season is over. If you tap a pine tree, there are a whole lot of pollen will come out. So those are obviously the male trees. I spent some time outside yesterday to see if I saw any seeds or anything different about the pine tree. I didn't really see anything. And I think that kind of goes back to a lot of the trees being male. But when I write up this document, I will go back and look and see. I'll include some pictures of the female pine trees that have the seeds, but they do produce the seed like a pine nut or a fruit.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Got any more questions, baby? No? Ask her what foods can you make, what drinks can you make with pine.
You said what foods?
She made me a tea one time, and she put some pine needles in it. My father has a whole slew of pine trees out by his house, so now when we go out there today, I'm gonna see if they have 5 needles or 3, just to see if it's white pine or longleaf pine.
Yes. So where's that little pine cone? So the loblolly, it has these little needles on the end. So if you see the little needles, I don't know if y'all can see that.
Yeah.
If you see needles, that's the loblolly pine, and it has 3 leaves. So yes, teas are good. We've been just sipping on pine and ginger tea for a while. It's good for your respiratory health and just overall wellness. But some uses that I've used with the pine needle, I like them when the leaves are kind of young, so kind of like in the winter, when they're kind of young, and they have this really fresh lemony scent to them. And so I'll chop it up into like little small bits, and I will use that to like season my chicken, kind of like how you would with like a rosemary.
Yeah.
So I've seasoned my chicken with that, and I made like some quinoa and some salsa, and I mixed all of that together, and it was really delicious.
That sounds amazing. Oh my goodness.
And I added the dandelion from outside, the dandelion and the wild lettuce. It's really good.
I'm going out hunting this week for some plants.
Yay!
Yes. Let's see. Christina, I'm trying to unmute you. There you go. Thank you so much for coming. What's your son's name?
Nathan. Nathan.
Nathan. Nice to meet you, Nathan. Thank you for coming. Hi,
Bianca.
baby girl. I'm sorry.
Bianca.
Bianca and Nathan. All right. Thank y'all for coming. Did y'all learn anything today? Did you learn anything today?
Yes.
Good, good. Okay, I hope you stick around. We have somebody coming on at noon to do a story. No, at 11 to do a story. So we're probably going to get cut off in about 2 minutes now. So thank y'all for coming. We'll be right back at the second Zoom meeting for a story. And then at noon, I'm going to be making compost bins with y'all. So yay. All right, go ahead and gather some dead leaves from outside because we're going to use that instead of brown paper bags.
Okay.
And the boys
All right.